AGFAIR 2024 saw the launch of the book Pubs, Publicans and People of Broken Hill in the Far West by local writer Emily McInerney. I caught up with Emily at the Broken Hill Book Company stall to talk to her about the book. All books brought to Broken Hill were sold and more are on the way to town soon. Thanks for joining me. What brings you to AGFAIR this year?
So I am promoting a book that I researched and put together called Pubs, Publicans and People of Broken Hill and the Far West.
Is this your first book that you've written?
Yes, it is the first book that I've written. Previously I was a journalist for the Barrier Daily Truth, so done a fair bit of writing, but the first book that I have written.
How did you go about researching this book?
So it was quite intensive. I used a lot of Trove and internet searching, but just trying to look back on past Barrier Daily Truths, past barrier miners, and sort of any past newspapers that had mentions of our local pubs.
How is the book structured? I've had a flick through and it looks like you've got sections on locations and different pubs.
Yeah, so we've kind of, the main part of the book is Broken Hill pubs, and it's just sectioned alphabetically. And then we go through sort of other areas in the region that had quite a few pubs as well. It's research from probably about the 1890s to now, but obviously it's not everything that's happened for every pub because that would be too much. So just sections, things that I found interesting that captured the history of the pub.
So how it was built or when it started and that kind of thing?
Yeah, sort of when it started, maybe who was the first licensee, how it was built, interesting things about it. One pub was the first to have electricity and lighting, so things like that. A huge section of history was the de-licensing of pubs in Broken Hill. So in 1923, pubs had to front the licensing court and say why they deserved to stay open. And a lot of that history came from there because licensees would explain how their pub was built, how many rooms it had, how much beer it sold, what the clientele was like. So it gave a huge picture on what the pub was like. So that's quite a big chunk of the book.
Yeah, wow. And why did the government want to do that, de-license pubs?
I think they just felt that Broken Hill had too many pubs and that it was maybe contributing to a lifestyle that they didn't want to promote. Because a lot of the pubs had to say, we're respectable and upstanding and our clientele is respectable, and they had to prove that they were safe and deserved to stay open.
So what was important about pubs in terms of the community? What did they provide?
Well, in the 1890s and sort of early 1900s in Broken Hill, they were the best built buildings. So they were often built of brick and stone. They were the most stable. Miners would live there and then go to work and come home. That would be the place where they stayed. So it started off as sort of a housing, places to eat, drink. And then, as we go into sort of the 60s, 70s and 80s, it became the social aspect for Broken Hill. I guess ashamedly, in that period, women and men were still drinking separately. You had your male-only bars and your female-only bars. And then it's more recent history where that has become joined and couples were able to drink together and go out together and mingle. And I think it's just, for Broken Hill, it's a huge part of our history because we've always had a pub essentially on every corner. It's been our social life, it's been how we catch up with people, and What was the highest number of pubs opened
in Broken Hill's history?
Yes, I think, I don't know if it was all at one time, but I know we had about 75 pubs in Broken Hill. So I don't know if they were all pubs and hotels. I don't know if they were all open at the same time, but it was about that. And I think that's sort of when, just before the de-licensing came into effect.
What did you find most interesting to learn?
There was a lot of things that were really interesting. So much to sort of like sift through. I like that. Like the Workies Club was just started by miners who felt that they needed their own place to be, and it's still going today. The Sturt Club, you were only allowed to become a member if your father was a member, and if you acted out in any way, you and your father were both banned. The West Darling Hotel, which is now the Broken Hill pub, used to have a blonde bar, which wasn't for blondes, but that was the colour of the wood that the bar was made out of. Yep. The Palace used to be the Coffee Palace and only sold coffee because of the temperance movement. So there's just so much, and there's so much history around Broken Hill, and it's crazy to see how quickly pubs were developed and how quickly they went up and how fast sort of our community grew based off of pubs and hotels.
How did they operate? Did people kind of frequent certain pubs? Was it people walking to pubs and that was their local?
Yeah, there were a lot of pubs sort of close to homes and close to football clubs. So there were quite a few pubs out the north. People would play football at the Jubilee Oval and then head to the Junction or the Northern of an afternoon. Even, half time they'd go to the pub and then go back to football to watch. It was very much the area that you lived in, your pubs were local there. So it wasn't so much as now where it's all sort of in Argent Street, Oxide Street. It was, you had a pub that was 5 minutes walking distance, and that's where you went to have your drinks and see people and things like that.
I heard at one point that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you couldn't have a drink unless it was at a pub.
Look, I think that would be probably true. I didn't come across that. I did come across a lot of you weren't allowed to drink on Sundays, and pubs weren't even allowed to serve you on a Sunday. So there were lots of court stories about police officers who would be doing pub checks on a Sunday, and unless you were staying at that hotel or the pub, they couldn't serve you. So a lot of excuses were, they're just clientele that's staying at the pub, or they're just passing through and they needed some water, and it ended up being a whiskey or something like that. So, but it probably, the whole outlook on drinking changed. So we had breweries in Broken Hill that would just deliver to pubs because that is where you would get your beer and your spirits. And then that changed probably more in the 90s, where you would go through a bottle-o or a drive-through and take a carton home. So it wasn't, drinking at home probably wasn't as big as it is now. That's for sure.
It sounds like this book is also just about the social kind of history of how we operated, and pubs were a big part of that story and the life of the town.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a lot of things that I found really interesting to learn, and that I did think that, this is just a make-up of Broken Hill's history and how it's developed. The decision for the South Overpass was made at the Alma. They voted at the Alma Hotel to get that going, to connect Broken Hill City to South Broken Hill. Things like that, mining meetings, sporting meetings, all held at pubs. And I guess notable people in Broken Hill's history, you can see where they've come from. You can see all the last names, and that someone now in this generation who was probably related to those people back then.
It's so interesting. Did you find it interesting?
I did. It was a hard slog because it's quite heavy. A lot of research. A lot of not being able to find things, being able to find things. It was very intense. But there were times where I was like, oh yeah, that is really interesting, and I didn't know that, and I can see why that is the way it is now. So looking back, it was just when you're in the midst of it, it is quite research intensive and it's quite hard.
Do you have any plans to just about finished? Do you have a plan for a next book?
Look, no. I mean, I think if people, because I think originally we kind of wanted a lot of interviews from people, but I don't think people saw me as real or didn't believe I was a real person, so a lot of people weren't getting back for interviews. So I think if we could do something like that about people's experiences in the pubs or running pubs, that would be a good follow-up. I don't know if that would happen if people would come to us and say, hey, look, I want to tell my story, but if we could do something like that, that would be interesting.